He was just a 1-month-old golden retriever, crushed legs, soaked in rain, left in a wooden box outside a closed vet clinic. No name, no tag, no one. And yet, someone heard him. A young vet intern, already broken by her past, risked everything to save him. No permission, no backup, just heart. Comment yes if you believe this little puppy deserved a second chance. And if she deserved one too. Rain crawled like silver threads down the windows of Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, streaking the glass with a quiet insistence. Portland's streets were hushed, in a way only the dead of night could summon. Fog swirled low, curling around lampposts and mailboxes like forgotten breath. Somewhere, distant thunder rolled low and slow, like a warning mumbled by the sky itself. It was 2:08 in the morning, the kind of hour when nothing good ever knocks. Mara Delaney sat alone at the intake desk, blinking away the sting of sleep. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun at the nape of her neck, tendrils escaping to curl over her pale temples. She was tall, lean, the kind of person who looked like she was always bracing for impact. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes too tired for her age. At 22, she was in her final year of veterinary training, and tonight was her turn, on the graveyard shift. A quiet corner of responsibility she usually didn't mind. Except, lately, the silence had begun to haunt her. Her fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the counter next to a closed file labeled, Darby, Feline, Renal Failure. The tea in her thermos had gone cold, forgotten. Then came the knock. It wasn't a timid tap, not the hesitant rapping of someone lost. It was sharp, urgent. Once, then again, and again. Mara stood too quickly, her stool scraping the linoleum. The knock had come from the side door, not the front. Odd. That entrance was used for emergency deliveries, crates of medication, after-hours transfers. But nothing was scheduled tonight. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door's lock, eyes narrowing at the security peephole. Nobody. The street lamp lit only the heavy mist. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned in. Then she saw it. A bundle. Small, moved slightly, barely noticeable, but there. She cracked open the door, just enough for cold air to slice through. Her pulse picked up as she stepped out into the drizzle, heart ticking faster with every second. The bundle was a towel, old, beige, and damp. Inside it, something trembled. Mara knelt, gently peeling back the fabric, and her breath caught in her throat. A puppy. Golden retriever, barely a month old, fur matted with blood and rain, ribs rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. Its hind legs were twisted unnaturally, folded beneath its belly like broken wings. It whimpered, soft and pitiful, trying to lift its head but failing. She looked around. "Hello?" she called into the night, voice shaking. "Did someone—" Nothing. No footsteps retreating, no engine idling. The street was empty. The puppy made a strangled sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Its nose was pink and raw, eyes rimmed with crusted sleep and panic. It smelled of wet fur and copper and the sterile sting of pavement. Mara's mind began spinning. You can't take it in. You don't know who left it. It could be sick, dangerous, rabid. There are rules. Rules. The word dropped into her chest like a stone. A wave of memory washed over her. Sharp. Unbidden. 2 years ago, she had stood in almost the exact same spot. Only it had been morning, not night. A man had burst through the door, cradling a limp beagle. It had been hit by a car, or so he said, brought in hours too late. Mara, just a second-year intern back then, had tried everything. Oxygen, fluids, chest compressions, but it had died on the table. Later, the owner claimed she hadn't acted fast enough, that she froze, that she could have saved it. The complaint had nearly cost her the internship. Since then, Mara had kept her head down. No risks, no bending rules. She followed procedure like gospel, especially the one written in red on the clinic bulletin board. No treatment without consent or known ownership. Strays must be reported immediately. No exceptions. And yet, she looked down at the puppy. The rain had soaked through the towel. Its little body shivered uncontrollably. Its eyes met hers, and something ancient flickered in that gaze. Not human, not language, but something that begged, not yet. Her hands moved before her thoughts caught up. She scooped up the towel, careful to cradle the shattered legs in her arms, and rushed inside. The door slammed behind her. Water dripped from her sleeves as she made her way down the hall, past the bulletin board and its warnings, into the triage room. Her boots squeaked on the floor. Inside, she laid the puppy gently on a heated pad under the examination lamp. The light bloomed across its soaked fur, revealing bruises and abrasions along its flank. She reached for gloves and antiseptic, swabbed the wounds with trembling hands. Her breath was loud in her ears. So was the question, "What are you doing, Mara?" She knew the answer. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe it wasn't about logic anymore. "I'll only stabilize you," she whispered to the pup, as though making a deal. "Just for tonight, then I'll figure something out in the morning." But she already knew it was a lie. She checked reflexes, minimal, palpated the spine, intact, splinted one leg, then the other. Her movements were mechanical but gentle, every wrap of gauze a silent apology. She sat back at last, shaking, staring at this tiny creature who had no name, no history, no one to fight for him. Something cold and sharp coiled in her chest, familiar. The same weight she'd felt the day the beagle died, but this time it was paired with something else. Resolve. The puppy stirred, a tiny yawn breaking the silence. Its eyes met hers again, this time less panicked, more trusting. The heat lamp hummed softly. Outside, the rain thickened. Inside, Mara Delaney broke a rule. The wind hissed through the alley behind Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, rattling a loose downspout like brittle bone. The rain had settled into a soft drizzle, thin enough to be missed by the unobservant, but constant, an endless hush over the sleeping city of Portland. Inside the clinic, the fluorescent lights buzzed in the hallway, casting a pale yellow glow on linoleum that bore the scuff marks of 100 emergencies. And in the very back, behind a door marked "Storage Staff Only," Mara Delaney crouched over a small improvised bed made from gauze packaging and an old folded towel. The room smelled faintly of iodine and dust, an unused supply closet tucked between radiology and the staff lounge. Metal shelves lined the walls, stacked with surgical gloves, unlabeled boxes, and expired forms. It was not meant for patients, but for now, it would have to do. Mara was kneeling in front of a plastic carrier with the door removed, watching the small creature inside breathe. The puppy's splints were makeshift but firm, wrapped gently around his hind legs. His head rested on the towel she'd found in the staff laundry pile, still damp at the edges, but warm against the heat lamp she'd dragged in from the grooming station. The puppy stirred, a quiet whimper escaping its throat. Mara leaned closer. "Hey," she whispered, brushing a finger across the soft fur between his ears. "You're still here. That's something." His eyes blinked open, a murky shade of amber rimmed with grayish haze. She wasn't sure if he could see her clearly. He looked so new to the world, and already so broken. She glanced around the dimly lit closet. No one had come back here since the beginning of her shift. As long as she stayed quiet, she could buy them both a little more time. "You need a name," she murmured. Her fingers hesitated mid-stroke. "Not that names fix anything, but you should still have one." Her gaze dropped to the bandages, to the slow rise and fall of the puppy's chest. "Lumos," she said softly, "like light. The kind you only see when everything else is dark." The word lingered in the air like a prayer. The puppy gave a tiny huff, as if in agreement, and tucked his nose beneath his paw. Mara stood, her knees aching from crouching. She pulled her jacket tighter. There was a draft in the room, cold air seeping in from a vent overhead, but Lumos was warm for now. She turned off the overhead light, leaving only the glow of the heat lamp behind. Then, with one last glance at the tiny, sleeping form, she opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. The corridor outside was silent, empty, except for a mop leaning haphazardly against the wall. Mara locked the supply room door behind her and pocketed the key. As she turned to head back to the front desk, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A small figure sat in the shadows at the end of the hallway, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. At first she thought it was a pile of laundry, but then the head turned. A boy, no older than 10. He was seated on the floor beside the janitor's closet, back pressed to the wall, his brown hoodie soaked at the shoulders and too big for his small frame. His hair was tousled and dark, curls flattened by humidity. He had long lashes and olive-toned skin, and there was a stillness to him, unnerving, like a photograph that hadn't moved for hours. Mara stopped. "Hey," she said gently, not wanting to startle him. "Are you Theo?" He didn't respond, only blinked. She recognized him now. Theo Marsh. Dorian's son. His father worked night security at the clinic. She'd seen the boy once or twice, always clinging to the hem of his father's coat, never speaking, never smiling. The staff said he was quiet, maybe shy, but there was something else too, something deeper. His silence wasn't just preference, it was armor. "What are you doing out here?" Mara asked, taking a slow step forward. Theo didn't answer. Instead, he stood, surprisingly graceful, and walked past her without a word. As he did, she noticed something small and soft in his hand, a gray knitted scarf, frayed at the edges. She followed his gaze as he reached the supply room door. Still silent, he bent down and carefully slid the scarf through the crack underneath, pushing it gently toward the sleeping dog inside. Then he straightened, looked at Mara, and walked away. Mara stared after him, something tightening in her throat. Back at the front desk, Dorian Marsh sat in the security alcove reading a paperback novel. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his beard peppered with gray, posture slightly hunched from years of carrying weight, physical and emotional. His uniform shirt was neatly buttoned, and his boots were polished, but his eyes carried exhaustion deeper than mere sleep deprivation. He looked up when Mara returned. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice a low rumble. Mara hesitated. "Yeah, I just saw Theo. I think he left something in the hallway." Dorian exhaled, a smile tugging the edge of his mouth, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That sounds like him. Likes to leave little gifts, especially for animals." "Does he, speak?" she asked cautiously. Dorian shook his head. "Hasn't in about 3 years, since his mom passed. We tried therapy, doctors, all that. Nothing stuck. But he's got his own language now. Just takes some learning." Mara nodded, unsure how to respond. The conversation faded, and she returned to her post at the desk. But her mind wasn't there. It was in the dim closet, on the slow breathing of Lumos, and the soft scrape of wool against tile as Theo left his offering behind. Hours passed. The rain thinned to mist. Mara completed the required paperwork for the night, her signature loopy with fatigue. Every so often, she glanced down the hallway, half expecting Theo to return. He didn't. At the end of her shift, as the sky behind the clinic began to pale into a soft slate gray, Mara slipped back to the storage room one last time. She unlocked the door, careful not to wake anyone who might be lurking in the staff wing. Inside, Lumos was asleep, curled tightly against the scarf, his body still trembling slightly, but his breathing was stronger now, steadier. Mara crouched again, touching his head gently. "Rest, little light," she whispered. She didn't know how long she could keep this hidden. She didn't know what would happen next. But for now, he was safe. It was nearing 5 in the evening when Dr. Vivian Hargrave arrived earlier than expected. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a dull sheen across the city like a polished stone. Portland's air was still thick with dampness, and the smell of wet concrete clung to everything. Inside the clinic, the quiet buzz of printers and light footsteps filled the halls. An ordinary day in every respect. Vivian Hargrave was not an ordinary woman. She walked with the precision of someone used to being watched, tall, angular, with short-cropped silver hair that framed a face carved in control. She wore a pressed gray blazer over her scrubs, a concession to professionalism she demanded from others but never explained. Her shoes clicked purposefully against the floor, always the same black low-heeled pair, always spotless. Her eyes were a cold slate blue, sharp enough to slice excuses before they were spoken. There was no softness in her posture, no pause in her movement. She had earned her role not by popularity, but by precision, by being right, and by leaving no space for failure. At 56, she carried herself with an authority that silenced rooms. Rumor among interns held that she had once worked at a prestigious emergency animal hospital in New York before an ethical complaint, something never spoken of in detail, had driven her to retreat westward. What lingered was a chill in her presence, as if empathy was something she kept on a high shelf, too far to reach in moments of doubt. Mara Delaney felt the shift in atmosphere the second the door chimed at the front. She was in the storage room, crouched beside Lumos, wiping a small crust of dried formula from the edge of his mouth. The puppy had eaten a little more that morning, just enough to curl up in a soft heap, tail twitching faintly. The scarf Theo had brought was still there, now clutched between Lumos's front paws like a talisman. She stood quickly, brushing dust from her knees, heart lurching. Dr. Hargrave wasn't due for another hour. Something was wrong. She locked the room again, slipping the key into her pocket, and walked out into the hallway, just as the clicking of Hargrave's shoes turned the corner. Their eyes met. "Delaney," the doctor said without breaking stride. "My office, now." There was no point in pretending calm. Mara followed. The office smelled faintly of eucalyptus and cold steel. A large whiteboard stood behind the desk, crammed with schedules and procedural reminders. The blinds were half drawn. Vivian sat with her back perfectly straight, tapping a closed folder on the desk with one manicured finger. "I conducted a routine inventory of surgical stock this morning," she said, voice level, "and I found evidence of unauthorized use. Heat lamp, antibiotics, gauze, glucose solution. Want to guess what I didn't find?" Mara swallowed. I can explain." "You always can." Hargrave's tone remained flat. "So here's your opportunity. Use it." Mara hesitated, then spoke. "Someone abandoned a puppy outside 2 nights ago. He was bleeding, 2 broken legs, no ID. I just couldn't leave him there." "Why not call animal control?" Hargrave asked sharply. I didn't want him to die waiting." "That's not your decision to make." Mara's voice cracked, but she stood her ground. "He would have died." Vivian leaned forward. "And you would have broken the law, Delaney. You used clinic resources without authorization. You hid the animal. You ignored direct posted policy. What else would you like to confess to?" Mara couldn't speak. "I have every right to contact the licensing board and have your internship suspended," Vivian continued. "Possibly revoked. Do you understand that?" "I do." Vivian stared at her. "Then why?" Mara was trembling. "Because I've seen what happens when we wait too long. 2 years ago I hesitated. A man brought in a dying dog, and I froze for seconds. Seconds. He died on the table. They said I was too slow. I've lived with that." Vivian's mouth tightened. "I'm not asking for approval," Mara said quietly. "I just need time. Please." There was a long silence. Then Vivian rose from her chair, slowly, and walked to the window. She didn't speak for a long while. Outside, the sky was darkening again. Rain threatened to return. Without turning, she said, "You have 48 hours. After that, if the dog is still here, I will report it. You will be removed, permanently." Mara stood motionless. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Vivian snapped. "Just don't make me regret it." Back in the hallway, Mara leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Her hands were clammy, her ears still ringing. 48 hours. That was something. She returned to the storage room. Lumos opened his eyes sleepily as she entered. She knelt beside him again, pressing her forehead gently to his. "We've got 2 days," she whispered. "Let's make them count." Later that evening, when the shift had quieted and Dorian had taken his break, Mara opened her locker to find something unexpected. Folded neatly on the middle shelf was a drawing, paper torn from a clinic clipboard. On it was a rough sketch, childlike but clear. A small puppy curled in a blanket. Next to it, a stick figure with long hair, a heat lamp above them, and next to the puppy, a speech bubble drawn in blue crayon. Inside it, 2 words, "Don't go," no name, no signature, but she knew. Theo. The boy had somehow seen more than she realized, had watched, maybe even listened, when no one thought he could. And now, he had offered something in return, a quiet plea. A message from someone who couldn't speak, to a puppy who couldn't walk, through a girl barely holding it all together. Mara folded the drawing gently and tucked it into her notebook. She returned to Lumos and sat beside him for a long time, the quiet weight of 2 lives resting against her knees. The wind had returned to Portland, pulling dry leaves through alleys and scattering them across empty sidewalks like paper ghosts. The rain had paused, leaving behind only the cold, the kind that soaked into skin and bone without ever asking permission. Inside Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, the quiet held steady, fragile and taut, like a held breath waiting to break. Mara Delaney sat hunched over her phone behind the front desk, eyes fixed on a name she hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Dr. Elsie Rowan. Her thumb hovered over the call button, heart pounding. She hadn't spoken to Elsie since her 3rd year, since the Beagle. Back then, Elsie had been her mentor, not officially. Just one of those rare senior veterinarians who still believed in nurturing rather than breaking. A compact woman in her mid-50s, Elsie wore oversized scarves year-round and read mystery novels during lunch breaks. Her curly gray hair was always in a loose bun, and her hands were constantly stained with ink and iodine. She had the laugh of someone who used it sparingly, and eyes that had seen both the beginning and the end of too many lives. Mara finally tapped the screen. The phone rang once, twice. "Mara?" The voice was warm, surprised, concerned. "Hi, Dr. Rowan," she said, her throat catching. "I'm sorry, it's late. I didn't know who else to call." Elsie's voice softened. "You don't call unless it's important. What's going on?" "And so," Mara told her, "about the knock at 2 a.m., the puppy with broken legs, the heat lamp in the closet, about Dr. Hargrave's 48-hour ultimatum and the weight of the rule book pressing against her chest." Elsie listened in silence, the way good doctors do. When Mara finished, there was a pause. "And you've named him Lumos?" Elsie finally said. "Yes." Another pause, this one shorter. "Then it sounds like you've already decided, haven't you?" Mara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Elsie continued. "I remember the day that Beagle died. You stayed until dawn, cleaning the table even after the janitor offered. Do you remember what I told you then?" "You said, grief is a room we never quite move out of," Mara whispered. "Exactly. But every now and then, we get to choose what furniture we put in it. If Lumos is your chair, your lamp, then save him. Rules are supposed to protect life, not bury it." When the call ended, Mara sat in silence for a long time. The city moved on outside. Buses hummed, neon signs flickered. Someone screamed at a parking meter, but she sat still. By noon the next day, her decision had been made. She went to the back alley where her rusted bicycle leaned behind the staff door. She wheeled it down to Hawthorne Pawn, a squat brick building run by a man named Sam, who never smiled but always paid fair. Sam was wide in the shoulders, with a tattoo of a broken compass on his forearm and a missing front tooth that didn't seem to bother him. He glanced at the bike and the tablet she pulled from her backpack. "Works?" he asked. "Yes," Mara said. "Just need the money." He gave her $260 in worn bills. It wasn't much, but it would buy enough for Lumos, anti-inflammatories, a small supply of pain medication, nutritional paste. The rest, she'd figure out. She returned to the clinic before her shift, slipping the bag of supplies into her locker before anyone noticed. She checked on Lumos. He stirred as she unzipped the bag, tail thudding softly against the towel. His eyes were clearer now, still fogged, still tired, but present. "You'd better not give up," she said quietly. "I traded my wheels for your heartbeat." Across the hall, something shifted. She turned. The janitor's closet door was open in just a sliver. Inside, Dorian Marsh was crouched beside a cleaning cart, his head tilted slightly, listening. He stood when she caught his eye, broad, stoic, grizzled from years of firehouse grit. Dorian had always struck Mara as emotionally untouchable. He wasn't cruel, just quiet, weathered. His navy work shirt had a name patch stitched in red, Dorian. The collar was worn, like it had been washed too many times in too many small apartments. "You've been watching me?" she asked, but without accusation. "No," he said, "just noticing." He leaned on the mop handle. "My son's been humming." Mara blinked. "Humming?" Dorian nodded. "First time since his mom died. It was faint. Last night after you left, I found him kneeling next to your supply closet. He was watching the dog through the vent. He was humming this little tune his mother used to sing. I haven't heard it in years." A silence settled between them. "You did something," he said, voice rough. "I don't know what, but you lit something back up in him." Mara swallowed hard. "It wasn't me. It was Lumos." Dorian cracked a small smile, then shook his head. "Still, thank you." He started to walk off, then paused. "If there's anything I can do, help hide him, cover shifts, just ask." Mara almost told him about Hargrave's deadline, but something told her to wait. That night, after her rounds, she returned to Lumos's nest. He greeted her with a weak tail wag and a soft yip that barely reached his own ears. She fed him paste from a syringe, cleaned the edges of his splints, stroked behind his ears where his fur had begun to grow in softer than before. As she worked, she felt the ache of exhaustion seeping into her spine. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from choosing to care when apathy would have been easier. When she stepped into the hallway again, a new drawing was taped to her locker. Crayon on cardboard this time. It showed Lumos with wings, huge, feathery, glowing wings, and beneath him, Theo stood with arms outstretched, catching the light. No words, just color, hope. Mara pressed the drawing to her chest and smiled. She didn't know how this would end, but it had already started to matter. The late afternoon sky over Portland had turned the color of cold steel, and a light drizzle returned, kissing the hospital windows with fine needles of mist. The storm from 2 nights ago had passed, but the air still tasted like metal, like something unfinished. Inside Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, the hallways were quiet, save for the occasional squeak of sneakers and the distant hum of a centrifuge. Mara Delaney sat in the back hallway near the supply closet, her legs stretched out on the floor, back pressed to the wall. Lumos lay in her lap, his breathing steady, his head resting against her forearm. He had started whimpering when touched near his hips. At first, she thought it was just sensitivity, but now she wasn't so sure. There were flinches, tiny spasms, and once, when he tried to shift his weight forward, he let out a sharp cry that made Mara freeze. The splints weren't enough anymore. He needed more than time and warmth. He needed surgery. But surgery meant money, far more than what she had left after selling her tablet and bike. And worse, it meant drawing attention to him. To her. To all the rules she was still bending just to keep him breathing. As she adjusted the towel beneath Lumos, the closet door behind her creaked slightly. "I figured it out," came Dorian's voice. Mara looked up. The night security guard stood over her, arms crossed. His dark skin glowed under the hallway light, and a new stain on his shirt suggested he'd just finished unclogging something foul. His expression, though, was softer than usual. "Figured what?" she asked. "Who dropped the dog?" he said. She blinked. "You did?" Dorian nodded, pulling a small USB stick from his pocket. "I accessed the external camera, the one by the alley door. Thought maybe you'd want to know." She hesitated, then stood and followed him to the security booth. Inside, the monitors flickered with various angles of the building's exterior. Dorian inserted the USB and brought up the archived footage. The timestamp read 2:06 a.m., 3 nights ago. The screen showed the alley drenched in rain, the garbage bins sagging under waterlogged cardboard. Then, a man appeared. Tall, narrow-shouldered, hoodie pulled tight over his head. He cradled a bundle in his arms and moved with a kind of trembling caution, as if each step hurt. He set the bundle gently down at the door, knocked 3 times, then turned and disappeared into the dark. Dorian froze the frame, zoomed in. The man's face was angled slightly to the side, enough for a partial view. Mara squinted. "Do you know him?" "Yeah," Dorian said. "Name's Jasper Quinn. He used to deliver meds here, maybe 6 months ago. Quiet guy. Good with animals." "What happened?" Dorian leaned back in his chair. "Word was he had a breakdown, car accident, lost his fiancée, lived in his van for a while before getting into one of the shelters downtown. Haven't seen him since, until now." Mara absorbed this in silence. "I can try to track him," Dorian added. "A few of the nurses do soup kitchen runs. Someone's bound to have seen him." That night, after her shift ended, Mara walked the 4 blocks to the Haven Street shelter, a squat building wrapped in chipped blue paint and guarded by a rusted gate. The receptionist, a broad woman named Helen with short gray braids and a no-nonsense stare, confirmed Jasper had stayed there until 3 weeks ago. "He keeps to himself," Helen said, eyeing Mara's clinic scrubs. "But he's not dangerous, just broken in a way that doesn't scare people, until they realize how deep it goes." "Do you know where he is now?" Mara asked. Helen shrugged. "Sometimes he volunteers at the animal pantry, the one on Thistle and Oak, worth a shot." The next morning, Mara went. The animal pantry was a converted shipping container tucked behind a co-op grocery store. Crates of donated kibble and cat litter stacked in haphazard pyramids, and a few volunteers bustled about in yellow vests, sorting cans and loading up bags for low-income pet owners. And there he was. Jasper Quinn stood in the far corner, organizing chew toys into a bin. He looked older than the footage suggested, mid-30s maybe, with pale skin and eyes like wet gravel. His hair was a mess of unwashed curls, and a long scar ran along the left side of his jaw, disappearing beneath the collar of his faded flannel. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if rushing might break the air around him. Mara approached quietly. "Jasper?" He turned, startled. His eyes flicked to her name badge, then away again. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" "No," she said quickly. I think you're the one who left the puppy at our clinic." He didn't respond right away, just stared down at his hands. "I didn't know what else to do," he murmured. "He ran out in front of me. I swerved, braked. God, I swear I didn't mean to. When I picked him up, he was shaking so bad. I couldn't take him to a vet. I'm not even registered anywhere. I panicked." "It's okay," Mara said softly. "He's still alive." Jasper exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and guilt. "I didn't think he would make it." "He might not," Mara admitted. "He needs surgery. It's expensive. I've been covering what I can, but I'm just a student." "I have nothing," he said flatly. Mara nodded. "I know. I didn't come here for money." "Then why?" She hesitated. "Would you want to see him? Maybe help out? At the clinic?" Jasper blinked. "You're letting me back in?" "I'm bending a lot of rules lately," she said with a tired smile. "What's one more?" When Jasper arrived later that day, he entered the supply room like someone stepping into a chapel. Lumos lay curled beneath his heat lamp, ears twitching as he sensed movement. Jasper knelt without a word, extending a trembling hand toward the pup. Lumos sniffed his fingers, then, miraculously, licked them. Jasper's shoulders shook. "I never got to bury her," he whispered, eyes glistening. "The girl I lost. I just disappeared. Like a coward. But maybe this is something I can do right." Mara stood at the door, watching. "Then let's do it." That night, Lumos cried out again when Mara adjusted his leg. The reaction was stronger this time, more immediate, more painful. She met Jasper's eyes. "We can't wait any longer." He nodded. "Then let's find a way." The clock above the operating room door ticked its way past 5:17 a.m., each second falling like a hammer inside Mara Delaney's skull. The hallway outside the surgical suite was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of hush reserved for places where prayers are whispered instead of spoken aloud. The waiting bench was cold and hard beneath her, but she didn't move. Her hands, clasped between her knees, were slick with sweat and trembling faintly. The building around her stirred with the beginning of life. Portland's pale blue dawn bled through the frosted windows of Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, brushing the walls with reluctant light. Somewhere outside, a garbage truck rattled past, its groan echoing against wet pavement. Behind the double doors, someone was fighting to save Lumos. Mara had called in a favor she'd never intended to use. The surgeon's name was Dr. Callum Breyer, a former professor of orthopedic veterinary medicine from Oregon State, now semi-retired, and working freelance shifts across clinics that could afford him. He was in his early 60s, his face sculpted in frown lines, and his voice always 3 tones too calm for any room he was in, thin-framed, perpetually dressed in loose black scrubs and navy sneakers. Dr. Breyer had a gait like someone used to long surgeries and short conversations. He was known for being brilliant and irritable, and utterly unforgiving of sentimental appeals. But when Mara had shown up at his apartment at 3:30 a.m., breathless and soaked from biking in the rain, carrying Lumos swaddled in a carrier wrapped in Theo's gray scarf, something in Breyer's hard shell had cracked. "You have one shot," he said, glancing at the dog's x-rays. "But if I do this, and he dies, you don't get to hate me." Mara had nodded, and then she had waited. The surgical light flickered once, the door remained closed. Her eyes stung with exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She barely remembered the last thing she ate. The caffeine from her 3rd cup of gas station coffee had burned off hours ago, leaving only the ache of nerves. A movement caught her eye. At the end of the hallway, in the narrow wedge of shadow between the vending machine and the wall, someone shifted. A small figure, barefoot. "Theo," she whispered. The boy didn't speak. His oversized hoodie dragged against the floor as he stepped closer, silent as a ghost. His dark curls were a tangle of sleep, and his eyes were heavy but alert. In one hand, he held a tiny book of animal stickers, edges worn and curling. "How did you get in here?" Mara asked gently. He shrugged. She opened her mouth to say something else, but he was already moving. Without a word, he sat down beside her on the bench. Close. Closer than usual. Close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Then he reached out and took her hand. Mara blinked. Her throat closed around a knot of emotion. His fingers were small, warm, and steady. She didn't move. Theo looked toward the door, then back at her. "He'll be okay," he whispered. It wasn't loud, barely a breath, but it was words, real, audible words, the first ones she'd ever heard from him. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She didn't squeeze his hand, afraid to break the spell. She simply held on. At 6:42 a.m., the doors opened with a quiet click. Dr. Breyer stepped out, pulling off his gloves with the methodical exhaustion of a man who had held a life between his fingers and hadn't let it fall. "He's alive," he said. "Stable, but it was close, real close." Mara stood, swaying slightly. "The breaks were severe, but clean. I've pinned both femurs. You'll need to keep him completely immobilized for the first 10 days. If he moves too much, the pins could shift." Mara nodded, dazed. "I'll leave the aftercare instructions with the tech," Breyer added. "He's going to need physical therapy, gradual load-bearing, but if he makes it through the next 48 hours... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Thank you," Mara said, voice raw. Breyer gave her a long look. "Don't thank me yet. The hard part starts now." He walked away, already pulling out his phone, probably calling his next gig. Mara turned back to Theo. He hadn't let go of her hand. "I didn't know you could talk," she whispered. Theo looked up at her. His lips twitched, just slightly, a flicker of something like pride. She smiled, and for the first time in days, it wasn't laced with fear. Later, after Lumos was moved into recovery, Mara sat beside his kennel and watched the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The incision site was wrapped tight, an IV fed into his front leg. His nose twitched occasionally, like he was chasing something gentle in a dream. She had made it through the night. So had he. She glanced over her shoulder and found Theo still there, sitting cross-legged on the floor just outside the recovery suite. He was drawing again. This time, not a dog with wings, but a dog walking, upright, head high, next to a girl in scrubs and a boy in a hoodie, 3 little stick figures, and no shadows. The days after surgery blurred together like brushstrokes in a storm painting, gray, wet, and slow to dry. The rain in Portland returned with a vengeance, splattering the windows of Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital in thick sheets that made everything beyond the glass look like it was underwater. But inside the small recovery suite at the end of the hallway, there was warmth. Soft light from a heat lamp, the quiet hum of medical monitors, and the gentle rustling of blankets as a little golden head pushed its way toward comfort. Lumos was still unable to stand. The pins had taken well, and the swelling was down, but his legs remained limp beneath him, like forgotten branches on a tree that still remembered how to bloom. He didn't try to move much, and when he did, there was a flicker of pain behind his eyes that made Mara's stomach twist. But he was eating again, wet food mixed with recovery paste, and he licked her fingers after every meal like it was his way of saying thank you. Mara spent nearly every waking moment with him now. Even when her official shift ended, she found reasons to linger, restocking cabinets, logging inventory, sweeping corners that didn't need sweeping. It gave her cover to stay, to kneel beside him and gently stretch his hind legs one at a time. Flex, release, flex, hold, whispering nonsense to keep him calm. It was crude physical therapy, but it was all she could offer without proper equipment. Not everyone was thrilled. Some of the staff had begun to talk, soft enough that they thought she couldn't hear. "That's not a patient, you know," said Carla Nguyen, one of the senior vet techs, a short, trim woman in her early 40s with impeccable eyeliner and a clinical sense of detachment. She prided herself on efficiency and didn't care much for sentimentality. "Delaney's wasting supplies on a stray. It's not our job to fix every lost cause." Mara pretended not to notice, but the whispers clung to her like wet coats. She carried them back to Lumos's room, setting them down beside her like invisible burdens as she wrapped a towel around his belly and tried to help him practice standing. His front legs were steady now, his chest stronger, But every time his back legs touched the ground, they folded under him like paper. Still, she praised him. Still, she smiled. Still, he wagged his tail. Every evening after the last technician left and the lights dimmed, Theo arrived. He no longer sneaked. Mara had told Dorian it was okay, that she welcomed it, and the security guard gave a soft nod and said only, "He sleeps better when he knows the dog's okay." Theo didn't say much, but that was changing. Each night he brought something, sometimes a crayon drawing, sometimes an old tennis ball he found behind the tool shed, once a storybook with the corner chewed off by time. He'd sit beside Lumos's crate, open the book, and read aloud in a halting, uncertain voice. His words were slow, shaped by long silence, but clear. The puppy ran through the grass, chasing the sun. Mara would sometimes sit just outside the doorway, listening with her eyes closed, letting the cadence of the boy's voice and the soft whine of Lumos's responses become her lullaby. One evening, as Theo finished reading a page about a brave dog who saved a town from a flood, Lumos lifted himself up slightly on his front legs and gave a short, cheerful bark. Theo looked up, wide-eyed, then laughed. The sound was so pure, so unexpected, that Mara dropped the clipboard she was holding in the hallway. When she peeked in, Theo grinned at her, a full grin. Mara crouched beside them, heart warm. "He loves your voice," she said. Theo nodded, serious now. He believes it. It was the most he'd said in one go. The next morning, Mara stepped out onto the narrow strip of overgrown grass behind the clinic, an unused yard enclosed by chain-link fencing and forgotten weeds. It smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached for her phone and texted Dorian. "You were right, he needs a space. Can we build something here?" Dorian replied within a minute. "I'll bring tools, Jasper too, tomorrow." The following day, just after sunrise, the back gate creaked open, and in came Jasper Quinn, carrying a folded sawhorse over one shoulder and a tool belt slung around his waist. His flannel was rolled at the elbows, exposing a faded tattoo of a feather that curled up his forearm like smoke. His expression was subdued, but clearer than the last time Mara saw him, less hollow, like he'd begun reclaiming something lost. Dorian followed behind, a wheelbarrow full of lumber in tow. He had ditched his usual security uniform in favor of a worn hoodie and work gloves. There was a light in his eyes, too, a softness not often seen in his stoic profile. "What exactly are we making?" Jasper asked, looking around. "A recovery garden," Mara said. "Just a corner, somewhere with grass and sunlight, a place where he can try walking again." They spent the whole day working, clearing brush, pulling weeds, laying down new soil. Jasper built a small ramp out of reclaimed wood. Dorian installed a lattice fence to keep it safe. Mara painted signs, one that read, "Lumos's Path," another shaped like a paw print. Theo helped by lining the edge of the walkway with smooth stones, each painted with a different color. By evening, the space was transformed. Nothing grand, just a 20-foot stretch of yard with grass underfoot and hope overhead. That night, Mara carried Lumos out under a soft sky, the first truly dry evening in weeks. She placed him on a blanket at the edge of the grass and sat beside him, watching as he sniffed the wind. Theo knelt on the other side, holding a treat just inches away. "Come on, buddy," Mara whispered. "You've got this." Lumos whined, shifted his weight, and then, with great effort, he pulled himself forward on his front legs, dragging his hindquarters slightly. 1 inch, then 2. His tail wagged. Theo held his breath. It wasn't walking, not yet, but it was movement, and it was enough. The morning air was crisp, with just a hint of spring teasing its way through the fading Portland chill. The rain had taken a rare day off, and golden sunlight sliced across the sky in clean ribbons, turning the puddles outside Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital into mirrors. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask for anything, but gave everything. Mara Delaney stood in the doorway of the small recovery garden, holding her breath. Lumos was on the grass, tail twitching. The puppy's coat, now fuller and almost completely golden again, gleamed under the sun. His eyes were alert, following the sound of Theo's voice, soft and patient as he knelt a few feet away, holding a treat between his palms. Mara's heart beat like a drum under her ribs. "Come on, little light," she whispered. "Show us." For a moment, Lumos just watched. Then, slowly, his front legs pushed forward. His hind legs quivered behind him, knees unsure, muscles thin from weeks of disuse. He tried once, his legs buckled. He whined, glancing up at Mara, almost apologetic. Theo didn't say anything, just smiled and nodded, still holding the treat out like a promise. Lumos tried again. This time, he shifted his weight more evenly, paws dug into the soft earth, and then, one step, a second, a third. He wobbled on the fourth and flopped sideways, tongue lolling out in a pant that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Mara dropped to her knees, eyes wide with shock and joy. "You did it!" she gasped. "Oh my God! You actually—" Theo whooped, an honest, delighted noise that echoed across the clinic yard. He threw his arms around Lumos and laughed so hard his face turned pink. Jasper, who had been watching quietly from the garden gate, let out a low whistle and muttered, "Kid's gonna run circles around us soon." Dorian gave a rare smile, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes warm. "Told you he was a fighter." Mara reached for her phone, hands shaking as she opened the camera. She framed the shot, Lumos sitting upright, Theo beside him, the sunlight casting long shadows behind them. She pressed record. The moment glowed. She posted it on her private social page, where she'd been quietly sharing updates about Lumos's recovery. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few kind comments from classmates, maybe an emoji or two from old professors. But within the hour, it had over 4,000 views. By noon, it had 20,000. By dinner, her inbox was flooded. The video had made its way to a local animal rescue page, then a parenting group, then a regional news blog. Comments poured in. "This made me cry. Following this miracle pup. Where can we send donations?" And then there was the email. It came from a woman named Celeste Thornbridge, a philanthropist and CEO of a popular organic pet food brand, Earthtail Company. Her assistant wrote the message, but it was signed in full. "We've been following Lumos's journey with great admiration. Miss Thornbridge would like to offer him a permanent home on her estate in Sonoma Valley, where she provides sanctuary to recovered animals. We believe Lumos would thrive there." Attached were photos of lush pastures, sleek modern barns, and dogs frolicking in the grass. Mara stared at the screen for a long time. It was everything she should want for Lumos. Space, security, expert care. A life free of fluorescent lights and cramped exam rooms. And yet, something in her curled at the thought. That night, she didn't sleep much. She wandered the clinic halls long after the others had gone home, drifting in and out of Lumos's room, checking his bandages, refreshing his water. He slept curled in a tight ball, tail tucked close, Theo's scarf still a favorite pillow. She found herself standing by the garden window around midnight, staring into the soft dark. "Would it be selfish to keep you here?" she murmured. A rustle behind her broke the quiet. Theo stood in the doorway, hair a mess of cowlicks, eyes half-lidded but awake. "You should be in bed," Mara said, startled. He walked toward her, dragging a piece of thick drawing paper in one hand. He didn't speak right away, just held it out. It was a picture of the clinic, more specifically the recovery garden, with Lumos in the center, a soft gold glow sketched around him. Theo had drawn himself on one side, holding the leash. Mara stood on the other, smiling. In careful block letters above the picture, he had written, "Home is where Lumos is." Mara's eyes burned. She crouched down and pulled him into a hug. He didn't resist. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered into his shoulder. "I just know I don't want to say goodbye." Theo didn't answer. He didn't need to. By morning, the video had surpassed 100,000 views. Reporters called, bloggers emailed, donations poured into the clinic's rescue fund. One elderly woman in Nebraska mailed a hand-knitted dog sweater with Lumos's name stitched across the back. But Mara hadn't replied to Celeste Thornbridge, not yet, because she wasn't sure this little dog belonged to the world anymore. He belonged to them. Rain hammered the glass roof of the staff break room, an erratic staccato that echoed through the clinic like a warning bell. The smell of stale coffee and wet wool filled the air as the clock ticked past 9 a.m. It was Tuesday, the day Dr. Vivian Hargrave had scheduled the formal review meeting. Mara Delaney stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, trying to keep her breathing even. Her scrub top was damp at the collar, her palms clammy. Beside her, Lumos dozed in a soft crate lined with Theo's scarf. His legs were tucked neatly beneath him, his breathing steady, his body stronger than ever. But his presence was the very thing that might cost her everything. Chairs had been dragged in and arranged in a haphazard horseshoe. At the center sat Dr. Hargrave, crisp as ever, in a navy wool blazer over dark gray scrubs. Her silver hair was pulled into a flawless bun, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. A clipboard rested in her lap like a gavel waiting to fall. 3 other board members flanked her. Dr. Neil Croft, a portly, soft-voiced feline specialist with an allergy to eye contact. Linda Ashworth, the clinic's operations manager, a statuesque woman in her 50s with auburn hair and a penchant for passive-aggressive silence. And Tara Fielding, a younger tech with wide eyes and a nervous energy that made her bounce one leg under the table like a metronome. Mara was told to speak last. Dr. Hargrave cleared her throat. "We are convened today to address a serious breach of clinic policy. Miss Delaney is accused of knowingly providing unauthorized medical care to an unregistered animal. This includes surgery, prolonged post-op recovery, and use of clinic resources without approval. These actions put our license at risk and reflect a disregard for ethical and legal protocol." Her voice was clinical, even devastating. Mara braced herself. Before anyone else could speak, the door creaked open. Dorian Marsh entered the room, not in uniform, but in a clean flannel shirt and slacks. He moved with slow purpose, the way firefighters sometimes walk, even long after they've retired. His presence drew every eye. "I'd like to speak," he said. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Marsh, this is an internal matter." "Then make it external," he replied. "Because what Mara did wasn't reckless. It saved lives. Not just that dog's, my son's too." A murmur stirred through the room. Dorian continued, voice low but firm. "My boy hasn't spoken since his mother died 3 years ago. Then a dog named Lumos showed up. And suddenly my son's reading out loud, laughing, drawing again. He's not just healing, he's coming back to life." Silence followed. Then came Jasper Quinn, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. His jacket was damp, curls dripping from the morning rain. He looked rough, but held himself upright. "I'm the one who left Lumos at the door," he said, stepping forward. "I hit him by accident. I was scared. I thought running was the only thing I had left. But Mara didn't run. She stayed. She stitched together what I broke. And I'm standing here now because someone believed in second chances." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded check. "I picked up shifts at the pet pantry. This isn't much, but I want to help cover Lumos's care." A gasp came from behind the line of chairs. Mara turned to see Mrs. Evelyn Green, one of the clinic's longest-standing clients, step inside. She was in her early 70s, petite, with silver curls and a cane that clicked when she walked. "If you fire that girl, I'm taking my business elsewhere," she declared. "And you can bet my bridge club will too. We don't forget kindness in this town." More footsteps followed. Clients, volunteers, people from the online rescue group who had driven across town just to sit in support. The break room was no longer just a hearing. It was an audience, a testimony. Vivian held up her hand, silencing the room. "I see that Miss Delaney has gathered considerable support," she said dryly. "But this is not a popularity contest. This is a legal matter." She stood. And then something changed. Vivian looked down at Lumos. He lifted his head, blinking at her. His ears perked slightly. She walked toward him, slowly, almost reluctantly. Kneeling beside the crate, she reached out a hand, not touching, just hovering, observing. "My father ran this clinic before me," she said suddenly. "He believed in rules more than anything. When I was 23, I found a stray outside the clinic, hit by a car, barely breathing. I brought it in, used his tools, his space, my hands." She looked up, eyes distant. "He found out and fired me, not just from the clinic, from the profession. Told the board I wasn't fit. I had to leave Oregon to work again." Mara felt her breath catch. Vivian's voice softened. "I built my way back, brick by brick, and I swore I'd never let anything risk that again." There was a pause. Then she stood. She walked back to her chair, took a pen from her lapel pocket, and signed the document in front of her. "Effective immediately," she said, "Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital will launch a pilot program, an in-house rescue and rehabilitation unit, starting with Lumos. Miss Delaney will oversee the project, with full authorization. The room exploded into applause. Vivian didn't smile, but when she turned to leave, Mara could have sworn she saw the faintest glint of softness in her eyes. Later, after the crowd had cleared, Mara sat with Lumos in the garden. Theo lay beside them, head on Lumos's belly, drawing again. This time a picture of the break room filled with people, their hands all reaching toward a single glowing dog. And above it all, in his careful blocky handwriting, kindness is policy now. The sun poured over Portland like a second chance. Warm, golden light fell across the brick facade of Hawthorne Veterinary Hospital, illuminating the vines that curled up its side and catching the edges of the new sign mounted just above the front door. It read in elegant, painted script, Lumos Recovery Garden, a place to heal. Mara Delaney stood in the middle of the garden, a pair of scissors in her hand, a trembling smile on her face. She wore her new white coat, freshly pressed, name embroidered just above the pocket in crisp navy thread. Dr. Mara Delaney, DVM. The day had finally come. Her graduation papers were signed, her internship complete. And, in a quiet staff meeting that morning, Dr. Hargrave herself had announced Mara's permanent position on the team. The coat felt heavy in all the right ways. The little crowd gathered around the fence included staff members, neighbors, volunteers, and a smattering of regular clients. Jasper Quinn stood near the gate, his curls slightly tamed, a new clean shirt pulled over old jeans. He leaned against the railing with a rare calm in his posture, eyes soft as he watched Theo pick his way through a line of garden stones. Dorian Marsh stood behind a folding table serving lemonade, his shoulders visibly relaxed, the creases in his forehead less pronounced than usual. Every now and then, he scanned the area, not for danger, just out of habit, and then turned his gaze back to his son, who had changed more than anyone in the past month. Theo no longer trailed behind shadows. He ran now, light on his feet, voice unafraid. Today he wore a shirt he decorated himself. Lumos's Crew, in bold black marker with a crooked paw print on the sleeve. Beside him, the star of the day bounded forward with uneven but enthusiastic strides. Lumos had gained weight, muscle, spirit. His fur was thick and sunlit gold, his eyes bright. His legs still stiff in places but moving with growing confidence. A soft bandana was tied loosely around his neck. Gray, like Theo's old scarf, but embroidered now with a name in white thread. Mara knelt down and opened her arms. "Come on, boy," she called. Lumos trotted forward, tail wagging so hard it wobbled his entire back half. He reached her, leaped once, awkwardly, joyfully, and knocked her over into the grass. The crowd burst into laughter and applause. "Okay," Mara said, breathless but grinning. "Maybe we don't need to show off that much." The ribbon was cut minutes later, and the garden was officially opened. Children wandered the little trail, touching the painted stones. A girl with Down syndrome kneeled beside the koi pond Jasper had helped build and whispered to the water. Elderly visitors petted Lumos gently, tears in their eyes. Dogs recovering from surgery sniffed the herbs lining the fence. There were sunflowers, wild mint, lavender, and a single bench with a plaque that read, "For those who needed someone, and found them here." Inside the clinic, the new Hope Corner had been established. A small, sunny room with a low window, filled with donated beds, gentle music, and pictures of every rescued animal that had passed through since Lumos arrived. His picture hung front and center, framed in cedar, with a quote in Theo's handwriting underneath. "You don't have to be whole to heal." In the weeks leading up to the opening, Mara had worked around the clock to finalize the structure of the new rescue and recovery program. With Dr. Hargrave's reluctant but genuine support, and thanks to generous donations from the public, and Celeste Thornbridge, who agreed to fund part of the clinic after respectfully withdrawing her adoption offer, the program was now real, fully staffed, fully protected. Mara still remembered the night she received her certificate of completion. Dr. Breyer had come to the ceremony, his tie askew, his grumble masking pride. "You'll do," he said, and that was the highest praise he'd ever given. Now, she had patients of her own, students to mentor, a title, a purpose. As the crowd began to thin and the sun slanted lower in the sky, Theo and Lumos stayed in the garden. The boy was quiet now, tracing the edge of a stepping stone with the toe of his sneaker, while Lumos chased a butterfly in clumsy circles around a rose bush. Mara sat nearby, sipping lemonade, watching them. Theo knelt suddenly, holding out a hand. Lumos padded over and pressed his nose into the boy's palm. Theo leaned close, brought his lips near the dog's ear, and whispered something only Lumos could hear. Mara saw his lips move, just 4 words. "You fixed me too." Lumos licked his face once, then dropped onto the grass, panting, tail sweeping back and forth like a brush painting joy onto the earth. Later, as the light faded and guests said their goodbyes, Mara and Dorian gathered the last of the empty cups. Jasper rinsed the paintbrushes used by the kids. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of lavender and mint through the fence. In the quiet that followed, Mara looked out over the garden. Not just a garden anymore, a beginning. A place where the broken weren't discarded, where the lost were named, where light wasn't something you waited for, but something you created together. Lumos wasn't just the name of a puppy. He was a miracle wrapped in fur, born from the smallest acts. A knock at midnight, a silent hug, a hesitant smile, a whispered word from a child who hadn't spoken in years. What happened in that little clinic wasn't just chance, it was grace. It was God placing broken people together, not to suffer more, but to heal. And through that healing, a new purpose was born. God doesn't always appear in thunder or lightning. Sometimes he whispers through soft fur, gentle footsteps, and quiet courage. He reminds us that when we choose compassion over fear, when we choose to reach out instead of turn away, we become his hands. We become the miracle someone else is waiting for. You may not be a veterinarian. You may not be a boy like Theo or a young woman like Mara. But maybe you are the one who will reach out, the one who will listen, the one who will believe that hope, even broken, can still shine. If this story touched your heart, please comment below with a story about your pet or a moment that reminded you of God's quiet miracles. Like this video if you believe kindness still matters in this world. Subscribe to follow more real emotional stories of healing, love, and second chances. And most of all, take a moment to pray for the animals without a voice, for the people trying to help them, and for all who feel lost, that they may find their way home. May God bless you, yes, you, who chose to stay until the end of this story. And if you are walking through darkness today, never forget, light doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it starts with a name whispered in love.